We live in a time of excess. Everything is more and more is better. The digital world has made it worse. We have too many films and shows to see, too easy access to all kinds of music and books, too many dishes to taste. We eat much more than we should, and we produce garbage in unprecedented quantity. In this world of excess, the only thing that we don't seem to have is time. How do we respond to this point of excess in everything that we do? We have also led to a great amount of this pandemic of excess in inequalities in society. The pandemic has pushed millions of people back into poverty. This kind of a problem has also become an extremely important problem in education. There are, if you look at education systems around the country, we have also caught up in the world of excess of disciplines and of information. And in a world of full of excess of disciplines of information, education has to take on a different meaning. If historically the meaning of education was to accumulate and understand the content, today it no longer can do that. Maybe a few students in a class can do well under these circumstances. But the value of education is its democratic nature, and it has to be inclusive more than anything else. Because what has happened in this pandemic world to education? Education too suffers from the problem of excess. There is an excess of disciplines. A listing of the number of disciplines, for example, in biology alone, runs into hundreds, many of which have separate departments and programs. So, also in every other discipline belonging to science. Content of knowledge has become unmanageably large. Even research publications have become excessive. Today, as many of you might know, we publish nearly 2.5 to 3 million papers a year, which works out around 7 to 8,000 papers a day, which are published in science. And how are we supposed to read through this massive production? Today, scientists need curators and librarians to help them read and manage the enormous content. School teachers are in no better situation as they too have to depend upon a huge amount of material from which to choose what to teach. So, how can we get out of this mess that we are in today due to this large cultural and educational excess? I believe that one of the best ways to accomplish this is to teach philosophical thinking to children right from school. There's a growing movement to bring philosophy to children in the West, and some common justifications for teaching philosophy to children include the following. They say that kids ask questions naturally. Philosophy deals with big questions of life. It can teach you ideas of right and wrong. And especially in today's world where everybody is worried about ethics, that becomes essential. And it's essential to also teach critical thinking and logic and so on. So these are good reasons to teach philosophy, but we should remember that along with these skills, there's another important task of philosophy, which is that it develops the capacity for critical reflection, self reflection, and to be open in principle to completely different perspectives. So, the strength of philosophy is its ability to unify and synthesize what seem to be great differences, and this is much needed today. So, in the case of India, and more generally in Asia and Africa, it's absolutely necessary to teach philosophy to children because most of these countries are caught in the middle of global education wars. Our paradigms of education are coming from elsewhere under different kinds of forces. And as some would say, there is a need to decolonize education in all these places. And why would we do that? Because you want to make education more inclusive and sensitive to local needs. So in this talk, I want to share with you some experiences and insights from a different approach of teaching philosophy to children. This is based on the workshops on philosophy that I've conducted for children with the help of my students and members of our organization, Barefoot Philosophers. Our attempts to teach philosophy was primarily as a way of thinking about perception, thinking, reading, writing, the basic things, the basic skills that you need to work in any discipline. It is first meant for students in class 5 to 7 because I thought that is that is a domain we have to focus. But we found that this model was useful across different grades and ages. These sets of workshops also led me to write a book called Philosophy for Children, Thinking, Reading, Writing, from which some of the examples I give below are taken. When I first announced workshops on philosophy for children, it was met with skepticism. I was told that children don't want to learn philosophy and they're already learning too much. And more importantly, I was told repeatedly that parents do not want to send them to such workshops. But the first workshop got so many responses that I couldn't accommodate many of the students. So in response, I did a series of workshops in different places, both urban and rural, and and very important in the context of India, and in languages other than English. So everywhere we found real deep interest among both children and parents in learning philosophy. And this was a big lesson for me, because many of the parents felt that if the children had had philosophy teaching in their schools, maybe they would do better in their other subjects. And that was a great sense of support to what we were doing. It is always a challenge deciding what to teach under the name of philosophy, whether it's for young students or my postgraduate and PhD students. Do we teach some concepts that philosophers have written about? Do we talk about philosophers? Do we drop all the names of famous philosophers? If so, which ones? Since the philosophy books are heavily biased against and ignorant about world philosophies, they are completely captured by a few philosophers in the name of philosophy. So, first, and this was another very important lesson in this attempt to teach philosophy to children. Firstly, I realized that philosophy to children had to be taught in a foundational manner, just like mathematics is taught as a foundation for learning the sciences. They don't teach mathematics by starting with what a mathematician said or how he or she presented a particular concept. The strength of mathematics teaching, particularly in schools, if not at the higher levels, is on focusing on critically understanding and exploring concepts. Secondly, I also realized that it was very useful to teach philosophical thinking through self reflection and awareness. And this brings the question of experience of learning into the content of what you learn, which is normally not done in the sciences, for example. Philosophical thinking became a way to become aware of our many cognitive and affectual processes. The focus was thus on making the students more mindful and aware of what they do when they learn something. So much of core philosophical thinking, the basic ideas in philosophical thinking, like what is knowledge, what is truth, what is reality, etc., is present in the self-reflective acts when you subject your experiences to questions and possibilities. So typically, we begin our workshops by thinking about perception. And we ask the children to look at a chair and ask them to look at a chair from different perspectives. Then the children themselves start wondering why, when each perception from different perspectives is so different, why is it that we call that, say, that object the same chair? What gives it unity to these perceptions? So this example, very interestingly, gradually led to the example of their own self when they were born and when they are sitting in this workshop. What was that? Does something remain the same in oneself from the time you're born to the time you are in now? And this also led them to think about similarities and differences, an important theme in philosophy. And the crucial point here is not just about talking about a perception of a chair and so on, but what we do with this is we extend it to the concepts and ideas they learn in their lessons. So this made them realize that just as they could explore the different perceptions of the chair from different perspectives, they could do the same for ideas and concepts like numbers. What are numbers? How do you look at them from different ways? Ideas of justice and freedom and so on. Philosophers will surely recognize some elements of the discipline of phenomenology in these kind of approaches that we tried. Now, from perception, it was a natural step to thinking about thinking, which is also done through the process of self-reflection. After all, there are experiences related to thinking. Every time you think, there is an experience of thinking, and we pay attention to that. So first, we began by asking them to focus on the body processes related to thinking. Whenever we ask people, are you thinking? All of them, all the children, like all adults, by the way, immediately say that they're always thinking. But the moment we ask them, what do you actually do when you think? We got very interesting responses. Some kids said they get a headache when they think. So we asked them why. They point to their heads whenever we say about thinking. And some kids, actually, it was very interesting. They thought a bit about that question. Why do they keep pointing to their head automatically when we talk about think? And then some of them pointed to their tummies as a place where they felt thinking. And what is fascinating about this is they are correct. For after all, some of the very interesting theories of thinking also relate thinking to the gut. And our most powerful experiences of thinking and worrying, by the way, is actually felt in the gut. So you can already see from this how the children start thinking not just by teaching them philosophical concepts and pushing philosophical theories on them, to start thinking about their experiences of thinking, and they start thinking about the body doing the thinking rather than blindly accepting the claim that it is the mind that thinks. So, through this immersion into the experiences of thinking and raising many critical questions about their own experiences, the children actually stumbled upon some of the most important elements of the philosophy of body and mind. So rather than teaching them a very complicated questions of philosophies of body and mind, there were kinds of conceptual grounding, conceptual grabbing of these ideas within children's mind as they learned philosophy in this manner. The second point about thinking that children responded to very strongly was the question of language in which they did the thinking. This issue is particularly important for a multilingual society like ours, even for science institutes like yours. Again, through your sections of questions and discussion, children learned how to relate thinking with language, whether they thought better in some languages, whether mathematical thinking was similar to thinking in languages, and so on. Now, one difficulty that we had in all this was that children had already been trained to believe that every question has to have one correct answer, and that's thanks to our great exam system. But the main strength of thinking is exactly the opposite. And we generally had some difficulty in convincing students to come up with multiple answers to a single question. And when they actually realize that it is okay to say absurd answers to questions and produce multiple answers, they opened up quite effortlessly. We also found that the question of language liberates students enormously. When they discuss the relation between language and thinking, they recognize that thinking is actually talking to themselves in some language. So it automatically led to questions of what language the children think in. They started understanding some of the basic questions in philosophy. They understood the basic principle of logic by analyzing how they come to conclusions and how to use language to do that. And they also asked a very important question, whether strengthening language skills strengthen their thinking capacity. So what I'm trying to say is, once we start introducing the children to more and more deeper ideas, then actually they begin to develop very rich ideas of what we would eventually call as philosophical, philosophy in a larger sense. I have long argued that one of the most effective ways of teaching mathematics to students is to use ideas of art and language. And talking about mathematical symbols and operations in terms of artistic creations and understanding them as we understand language opened up mathematics to these students. So I'm not going to say they understood mathematics better, but when they start asking questions like, what are numbers? Are they like other objects? Are they like characters that we see in comics? Do numbers have qualities like chairs have qualities, etc.? I found that many students derived great pleasure from recognizing that mathematical entities did not exist like physical objects. It actually made them think of mathematics as stories, narratives, and as a domain which was very imaginative. And no session on philosophy is, of course, complete without ethics. And our experience was that it was the importance of teaching ethics through philosophy and not just as a list of do's and don'ts. Because there are moral, the states also have moral experiences with them. And once students start reflecting on that, they were actually able to raise very important questions about some of these basic ideas of what constitutes duty, what constitutes consequentialist theories, and so on. Now, once they do this, I just want to end with this point about that there are, of course, many challenges in this. It's not just as simple as saying they learned everything and they changed radically. They don't. No education does that. One of the couple of important challenges was that we keep telling them be critical, but asking questions was not enough. They had to be taught how to ask questions. And also this question about learning to have multiple answers, multiple perspectives was very important, because by doing that, they learned a variety of things including multiplicity and diversity. And so what I want to end with is this, that today our education is fractured into multiple disciplines and is a domain filled with fear and competition. It is a world that has also alienated many children from their own histories and practices, as in India. How does one deal with these alienations? You cannot teach children in Asia and Africa philosophy like you do in the West, since that only wrongly imposes the idea that philosophical thinking is primarily a cultural product of the West. I am convinced that based on our experiences so far, that teaching philosophy to children as a foundation in the manner we did will liberate students and not fragment them cognitively, emotionally, and socially, like we have fragmented disciplines and knowledge. Thank you.